Hello, ladies and gentlemen, veterans, dedicated VA employees, and all viewers. Hey, thank you for visiting my channel again and another video where we talk about VA disability. Hey, again, my name is Attorney Matthew Lang, and I'm a VA accredited attorney. Today's topic, I want to go over just some theories of service connection and how veterans you can get service-connected disability from the VA. So the first of these theories is known as a direct theory. Now, the direct theory is the most common approach to getting service connection compensation from the VA. This theory has three elements to it. The first element is going to be an in-service occurrence. Now, this occurrence could be something related to an MOS, duties you did during service, could be combat related, it could be documented in your service treatment records when you went to medical or sick call. As a complaint or a diagnosis or just symptoms. So that's our first element. That's the, again, in-service occurrence. The second element we were going to look for is a current diagnosis. When you put in your claim, you've got to have a diagnosis for that condition. Now, whether you get that diagnosis from a doctor before submitting your claim and you provide that evidence, or whether that diagnosis comes in a VA exam afterwards, either way, as long as you got that element met by diagnosis, you're good. So those are first two elements again, current diagnosis and current in-service occurrence. So we need a third element to link those two together, and that's essentially what that is, a link, or what's known as a nexus. Now, underneath the nexus is usually a medical opinion by a qualified examiner, or doctor, physician, or medical personnel, that can say yes or no as to the likelihood that your current diagnosis is either due to your service or related somehow to your service occurrence. So those are the three elements. Now, one thing that I want to point out when we talk about direct, it could also be an aggravation to your service. So it could be possible that you had a condition prior to service that was aggravated during service, and then that can be looked at too. We get a little more complicated rules with that one, but just know that direct could include the aggravation of service with a condition prior to service. It could also include just the fact that service had created this condition that you are suffering from and dealing with today. So the second theory would be the secondary theory. A secondary theory is another common theory that I see in my practice that gets claimed. So there's, again, about three elements to that one. So again, the elements can be the same as the direct for the most part. First, you're going to need a current diagnosis. Again, whether that's by a physician prior to the filing of the claim or if it's obtained after the filing of the claim. Either way, as long as we got evidence that meets that current diagnosis. So that's one element, current diagnosis. Now, the second element is very similar to an in-service occurrence, but the idea here is instead of actually occurring in service, we want to relate it to a different condition that occurred during service. So a condition that you become service-connected for that could be related to the condition that you're currently diagnosed with and that you're claiming. For example, we see a lot of times in practice things like migraines secondary to mental health. With the medical literature out there, this is a plausible connection that the mental health could potentially aggravate the current diagnosis you have. So those are our first two elements. It's very similar again to the direct. The idea that there's an in-service occurrence, which would be your service-connected condition that occurred in service. And then the other one being that current diagnosis again. So guess what? That third element again is, well, very similar, if not exactly the same, as the direct service theory. Again, we need a link. We need a medical professional, a doctor, or another qualified individual, medical professional, nurse, whichever, whoever the law allows, depending on the condition, to give an opinion as to whether your current diagnosis, for my example, say migraines, is either caused by or aggravated by your service-connected mental health condition, whether it be PTSD, anxiety, or depression. So those are three elements for a secondary. So a secondary again requires the service-connected condition, a current diagnosis, and a link of either being caused by or aggravated by the in-service service-connected condition. So the third theory that is typically seen when filing a VA claim would be known as presumption. Now, presumption is a really big section. There's multiple different pieces of the law to this one. The most recent one we've encountered is the PACT Act. So the PACT Act is a presumption law. So essentially what presumption is the idea that you, veteran, either served in a location, was presumably exposed to, whether it be burn pits, Agent Orange, radiation, whatever's on the list. It's presumed that whatever exposure you had during service would have created the condition you're claiming that's on that list. So let me back up and see if I make more sense of that. So a presumption essentially is a list of conditions and exposures or locations that says that, veteran, if you served in a location or were exposed to whatever hazard on the list, then, and you happen to be diagnosed with this condition that's also on the list that's been found related to these locations and exposures, then it's presumed that that condition was due to your service. In many cases, it doesn't matter how many years after your service. So, for example, to break things down better, we see Camp Lejeune as a popular one out there, the drinking water contamination. So there's a certain period of time, if you served at Camp Lejeune, you would have ingested enough water to potentially have a cancer of some sort, whichever's on the list. I believe like a bladder cancer is a very popular one on the list. So forgive me for not having the whole list memorized. The other popular ones are like Agent Orange exposure. Thailand, Vietnam locations are huge. If it's shown you were there and you ended up with like diabetes, for example, that's a very popular one. Again, there's a whole list of these conditions. Then it's presumed that those are all related. Now, there are sections of the presumption law that says only certain conditions will be presumed following 1 year of service, no matter what the service was. So if you happen to have one of those, usually like we use migraines and headaches for an example, that's on the list. So if you end up with a diagnosis of migraines or headaches within 1 year of discharge from service, that could be a presumption claim as well. So presumption presumes the nexus is essentially what it does. So there's still really three elements if you think about it. We have the in-service occurrence, and in our case, presumption lists that some location likely or some exposure happened. That's your in-service. Your current diagnosis is still your current diagnosis, and then your link is just a presumed link. It no longer requires a medical provider. Now, veterans, one thing that is out there in the law, though, is if at any time your evidence clearly shows a rebuttal to the presumption, it could be possible that your condition, even though on the list, may not be service-connected. In my opinion, very unlikely. I don't see that very often. It's usually not the case. But just know it's not a guarantee 100% of the time. So those are just three theories of service connection. And again, it was direct, secondary, and presumption. The biggest thing I want to point out with those three theories that I'd like to help the VA with, because one thing I noticed when I trained in the VA and mentored in the VA, the concept seemed to be there's too many laws, there's too many rules. Yeah, there are different rules in the way that elements are worded, but the basic foundation is the same, as I've shown, right? 3 elements. It only takes 3 elements to get service connected, whether it be direct, secondary, or presumption. in service, current diagnosis, and a link. Too easy. Anyways, veterans, that is really today's talk. It's really short, but I wanted to give you a little education on that in VA. Just remember, very easy. Three elements of service connection. You've got the evidence that shows an element of in-service. Great, done. You got evidence of the current diagnosis. Great, done. You got evidence of a link. Great, done. Now, one thing I got to caution the VA though is make sure your links meet the requirements of the law. Unfortunately, medical providers don't work in the law, and they can only get what you request them from the law. And if you don't request it properly, make sure your link could be completely wrong, and honestly, from my experience, likely is. So make sure that you understand the additional part of the rules outside of the foundation. But the point is, there are a foundation of 3 rules in order to get service connection, no matter what that theory ultimately is. So again, I thank everybody for watching the video, coming to the channel. I look forward again to more videos, discussions. I look forward to one day where veterans and even VA employees, you provide me with questions that I can answer in generalities. Of course, I can't do all details based upon facts of the cases unknown and so forth. But I love to give generalities and answer questions the best I can, so I look forward to those days as well. I do wish everybody a great day, and thank you again for watching.